Welcome to On the Middle East, Al Monitor's weekly podcast focusing on the big issues of the day. My name is Amber Zaman, and this week we will be looking at a crisis that is unfolding on the Iraqi-Syrian border between the Kurdistan regional government of Iraq and the US-backed Syrian Kurdish-led administration in northeast Syria. The border, a critical humanitarian supply line for cross-border aid to northeast Syria, has remained closed since December 15th because of escalating tensions between the sides. With us here today is Hiwa Osman, a leading and most importantly independent commentator on Middle Eastern affairs, who is based in Iraqi Kurdistan. Hiwa travels frequently to northeast Syria, where he has an incredibly broad network of contacts, as he does elsewhere across the region. In fact, I bumped into him there in November on my last trip to northeast Syria. So welcome to our show, Hiwa. It's so great to have you. You live in a very tricky region, and so we're extra grateful that you have agreed to speak to us today.
Thank you, Amberine. Thanks for having me. It's an honor to be on your show.
The honor is all ours. So basically, something incredible is happening on the border between Iraqi Kurdistan and northeast Syria. The area that's run by the Kurdish-led autonomous administration and that is under US military protection. The border has been sealed for now nearly a month, right? No aid coming through, no commercial traffic, and this story has really not gotten anywhere near the attention it deserves. And I do know that, there's a lot of concern, certainly among Western governments and of course in the northeastern Syrian administration. Now, you are very closely familiar with all these dynamics. So tell us, what is going on? Why has this happened?
Well, the border has been closed since the 15th of December of last month. And it's almost been 20 days now. And it started with some youth groups that are believed to be associated or have close in their ideology to the PKK within northeast Syria. It's a small group called Jawani Shorishgar, means the revolutionary youth. Sometimes they conduct attacks on certain personalities, but they are a small group. They are not representative of the wider population. There was an issue over some people who were from members of the PKK who are originally from northeast Syria. They were killed in the Kandil Mountains or after the recent operations of the Turkish army, and the people wanted to receive their bodies. There seems to have been difficulty in delivering the bodies of those who were killed. And as kind of a demonstration or a protest took place on the border. And according to some reports from the KRG, the Kurdistan Regional Government, this is the government that controls the Iraqi Kurdistan, they say that they threw stones at them, and they threatened to attack the border gate if they do not receive back the bodies of those who were killed in the mountains. And as a result, the KRG decided to close the border. Now, obviously, this border isn't just for transporting or transferring corpses or transferring for just humanitarian, or mostly it is for humanitarian purposes. But many people who reside in northeast Syria benefit from this border. It has basically a few aspects. On one hand, there is some commercial trade between the two sides. Many of the goods that Turkey doesn't allow to enter northeast Syria, or the goods that used to come from the Syrian regime areas to northeast Syria, in the past now come, or they used to come from Iraqi Kurdistan. People who need treatment, medical treatment, they come to Erbil or Duhok or Suleimania in Iraqi Kurdistan from northeast Syria. Other people visit each other, so it's used for international NGOs and many other aid organizations. Now, all of this has been put to a halt, and the border has been closed since the 15th of December. We are not seeing much move on the political front to have talks. We have seen some
So,
delegates coming from northeast Syria to KRG to talk to them, but nothing really has moved on the ground yet.
so why this disproportionate, I mean, wildly disproportionate response on the side of the KRG? As you said, it's a small group that's quite marginal, and okay, so they demonstrated, and you know, they say the northeast Syrian side says that the rock throwing began from the Iraqi Kurdish side. At least that's what the Jiwan and Shoresh Ger said in their statement, I believe. But whatever, I mean, what you just described, it's incredibly serious what's going on. Why? Why are they so angry?
It is indeed. I think the measure is quite disproportionate. Looking at this group and their status from within the society in northeast Syria, they are not that popular. This is very clear to any visitor, anybody who visits. You would always hear complaints about their behavior in northeast Syria. And some analysts believe that this disproportionate measure is perhaps to pressure the authorities in northeast Syria to take serious measures against these groups, because one of the issues, or one of the complaints that the KRG has about the northeast, the self-administration in northeast Syria, or the SDF, is that they are under the control of pro-PKK elements, and they do not take serious measures against them. This is perhaps seen as a measure to force them or to corner them into taking action against this group, or declaring them illegal, or arresting some of their members. Perhaps I think this is the only analysis for such uh, harsh measure as many people describe it.
Well, that's something that the KRG has been asking of the administration in northeast Syria, the Syrian Democratic Forces, and the Syrian Democratic Council for quite a while now. And the United States has been supporting it in those demands. And in fact, that was a precondition that was laid down by the opposition Kurdish National Council during those now stalled unity talks that were being sponsored by Muslim Kobani, the SDF commander-in-chief, and the United States. Now, all of this begs two questions. First of all, is it reasonable to ask this of the Northeast Syrian administration, to ask them to quote unquote get rid of, or however you wish to describe it, the PKK, given first of all the historic links that exist, and above all the fact that the PKK did play such a critical role, first of all in establishing that administration and in fighting Daesh alongside the United States, in fact. And second, my second question is the administration in northeast Syria in a position to actually deliver on this demand?
Look, Amberlin, as you said, I mean, the question of PKK presence in northeast Syria is a lot more nuanced than it's not just a black and white situation. And as a result, you cannot ask for a black and white solution, either all or none. I think it is a process. The whole administration of that area, combined between those who are running the place, and those who are in opposition as well, and those who are outside and are more radical by and sometimes use the PKK as a platform or the PKK ideology as a platform to exert more pressure on the likes of the General Mazloum, uh, are creating a unique setup in northeast Syria. I believe, as you said, the PKK presence there it has historic connections. They fought alongside the Americans in Kobani. We all remember. Uh, had it not been for some elements that were in the past trained by the PKK, Kobani would have fallen into the hands of ISIS, and the Turkish army were just watching from over the hill, overlooking the city of Kobani. So the history is long. What is, I believe, best should be asked of them is to conduct a series of reforms that even pressures the PKK to accept these new reforms, because sometimes many of the people who are in the administration may have some PKK background or associations with the PKK, but being a PKK member in the mountains is a very difficult modus operandi from running a city with everything else, or running a population of nearly 4 or 5 million people, or even more now in these areas. So that's why uh, asking the SDF or the commander in chief, General Mazloum, to get rid of all PKK and everything else to do with the PKK overnight is really not reasonable, and it will be very difficult for him to do so. What he can achieve is to be helped in conducting enough reforms that gradually could reduce the role of those more radical. Some of them are even using the PKK umbrella or the PKK title in order to continue the way they are now in these areas. That's why somebody like General Mazloum and the administration should be helped in conducting reforms, conducting political and economic reforms that could create, that will create a more representative, a more inclusive governance structure in these areas, so that the role of the radicals, the spoilers in that area, like Joanne Shorishgarfa as an example, will be more and more reduced. But to create this big hoo-ha around the PKK presence, and using incidents like this to block the borders, and create a situation whereby the entire population feels punished by an action of such small group, could only strengthen the hardliners, in every area, especially in transitional phases.
Of
You
course,
have the moderates and the radicals,
of course,
and the moderates should be supported.
totally. But when we zoom out a bit, Hiwa, of course, there's the broader question of Turkey and the ongoing, the more than 3 decades old fight between the PKK and Turkey that's now playing out in Iraqi Kurdistan and also in northeast Syria or Rojava. So even if, let's say, General Mazloum were to be successful in these reforms that you described, and the PKK were to take a more, or the radical elements as you describe them, were to take a more conciliatory stance, we all know that Turkey will always say that none of that matters, that they're all PKK, and that they pose an intrinsic threat to Turkey's national security. And of
And
course, there's that relationship with the Iraqi Kurds and with the KDP in particular, where of course there's that huge dependency on the part of the Iraqi Kurds on Turkey, which results in their feeling obliged to participate or at least not complicate Turkey's actions against the PKK in Iraqi Kurdistan proper. So against this background, how do we move forward in the absence of a renewed peace process between the PKK and Turkey? And there's really nothing on the horizon, not as long as Erdogan remains in power, it seems.
Well, this is exactly where the international community has to come in. I mean, looking at this, as you said, zooming out, looking at the Rojava issue, it's a microcosm or it's a small part of the bigger conflict. And the root cause of all of this are two things. A, Erdogan's anti-Kurdish policy, and it is very clear, and he repeatedly said, we do not want an entity in northeast Syria similar to that of North Iraq. He doesn't say Kurdistan, of course. So that's a mechanism for saying that he doesn't want any Kurdish presence or entity on his border, be it PKK, KDP, PUK, you name it, or any other, even if it's an Islamic AK Party Kurdistan branch, he will oppose it. But now he has the perfect excuse because he's in a conflict with the PKK, because the international community is listening to what he is saying. He brands the PKK as terrorists. The Americans blindly are following him by saying that, yes, the PKK are terrorists at the same time as they were fighting ISIS alongside the Americans, both in Iraqi Kurdistan and in Rojava. This is where I think the role of the international community has to come in, and specifically the United States. I think Erdogan is maybe in a better place now, or to open up at least to the prospects of some form of dialogue on that. He could, I mean, this is could.
Why now?
He's approaching an election, and his policies are proving less and less popular inside Turkey. He needs an escape rope, and I think opening up to the Kurds again could help him restore his old position.
Well,
But
I
having
kind of
this
beg to differ
strong,
there because I think his troubles are so great. The economy is in such a terrible state, and that really is the main
and
cause
this is
for his
one of
loss
the
of support. And second, he has these nationalist allies, so it's like a catch-22. If he makes a move towards the Kurds, then he loses the nationalists. And besides, I don't think the Kurds in Turkey will buy it anymore. I think they see.
But see, the thing is, with one of the main drains on his budget is his continued operations and his anti-Kurdish policy that he's exercising inside and outside Turkey. Look at the operation that is still underway now in Iraqi Kurdistan. It's the 40th operation. He keeps doing the same thing and expects a different result. Every summer, every winter, every spring, we have an operation of the Turkish army to try, and every time they say we eliminated or we got rid or we seriously undermined the PKK, and the PKK is still there. 40 operations didn't end it. 40 more operations will never end it,
I
because the
mean, look,
problem.
I completely agree with you. Whoever is in power, a peace process absolutely needs to be resumed. There's no question about that. I mean, Turkey's future, the future of democracy in Turkey, and also its economic well-being, hinges on that. I completely agree with you. But setting that aside for a moment and going back to Iraqi Kurdistan, where you are sitting right now. Isn't it also true, though, that historically the KDP has always felt uncomfortable with the PKK, doesn't really like the PKK? And as you recall, back in 2012, when the Kurds in Syria declared their self-administration, that then too the border was sealed, and the feeling certainly among the Barzani family was that the KDP Kurds in Syria should be really running things. So there is that too, isn't there?
Look, there is a historic rivalry, or at least to say the least, not good terms between the PKK and the KDP. And this dates back to the 90s of the previous century. Now, the problems between KDP and PKK, the direct knock-on effect of their issues happens in Rojava. Many of us say that the problems of Rojava cannot be settled unless there is an understanding between the PKK and the KDP over that area. Because from what we are seeing, no on the ground indigenous movement has emerged yet to say Rojava first. Although Mazloum is calling for that, but he is, according to many, he is not doing enough to prove. They say he is taking an incremental approach in that direction, but it doesn't seem to be enough to be able to liberate
Well, what do you think
Rojava.
of what he's doing? I mean, you know him very well. You know all the major players in Rojava very well. Do you think it's fair to say he's not doing enough?
I don't think so, to be honest. I think he's trying his best, but it is, as I said, it will be unfair and unrealistic to expect him to get rid of everything, all influences, external influence over Rojava overnight, and that's why his incremental approach to have a Rojava first policy. He means well. He is trying his best, but I think he should be given time. The PKK should not feel threatened by somebody like Muslim, and the KDP, on the other hand, should give him more time, or should give him the credit for trying to, or should have some confidence in him, in the sense that he is trying to uh, have a Rojava first policy. The situation inside Rojava is very complicated. A Rojava first policy and procedure cannot happen overnight. It is a process, and it is an extremely delicate process. It has to be step by step. And with every step that he made, he had to play or to see the reactions of various sides. I mean, come on, the guy deals with KDP, PUK, American Army, Syrian regime border points on his border with Turkey. The Russian army are there. Sometimes you see the Turks have entered into his area and have taken large chunks. Now this guy is dealing with four armies, international armies in his area, and the politics, they dealing with the internal Kurdish politics. So it's not an easy task, you know.
Not at
It's
all, not at all. And you mentioned the PUK, so I want to just interrupt you and ask you about what's happening on that front, because, and you wrote about this very eloquently. We just saw a sort of power grab where one of the Talabani brothers, Batul Talabani, and his brother, actually, Kubad, really, though he wasn't really at the forefront of all of this, but obviously very involved, sort of decapitated Lahore Talabani, the cousin, and got rid of his allies in the security services and somehow just basically stripped him of his power. And Lahore was always seen as a very pro Mazlum, pro Rojava kind of figure, and which, of course, incurred Turkey's wrath. Um, how has that affected the situation in Rojava?
I don't think it has a direct knock-on effect. I mean, Lahore's connection with Rojava was within the PUK framework, the PUK in general, and their counterterrorism unit, through coordination with the Americans and the international coalition, were more ready than the KDP to help. At times in their fights, but although I mean the fighting was happening in Kobani, back then. This is where it dates back, their good relationship. I think because the KDP, the PUK, and the SDF or Rojava do not share borders they would have less problems. I mean, it's obvious. But on the border, and there is influence, the local population in Rojava has two marks politically. Usually, you say either you are a Barzani or an Apochi. Apochi reference to Apo, the leader of the PKK. A lot less people support or come from the political background of being pro PUK, in so that they are really not a player on the ground as the other two, KDP and PKK in Rojava. Since the split, or since the events that happened within the PUK, we have not seen or heard any open statements, for example, from Bafel or from Kubat to speak against Mazloum. In fact, Mazloum tried to mediate between the two sides, which is also, and he visited Suleimaniya, stayed there for a few days, had the two meet each other, and he failed uh, to make the two reach an agreement. So that's an indication that he stands at an equal distance between the two cousins, and I don't think neither the SDF or Mazloum would want to take sides, nor the PUK would want to take sides in this internal SDF PYD conflict. So I don't think it will have a direct knock-on effect on the status either of Mazloum or the relationship with Mazloum with Lahore on his status within the PUK.
But looking at this whole picture and considering that we didn't mention this, but Syria is undergoing its worst drought in 70 years. And
Yeah.
of course, Rojava, northeast Syria, is the breadbasket. That's where all the wheat grows, all the cash crops grow, and they're not growing because there's no rain. And farmers are just, collapsing under the heavy debt, and
Yeah.
prices are shooting through the roof for basic commodities and bread and all of that. So the overall situation looks pretty grim. How does how do the Syrian Kurds get out of this, especially since there's now this new layer of pressure with the border closure? And how engaged do you feel the Americans are in trying to fix all of this? Because there is this sort of emerging or growing feeling, should I say, that the Americans aren't quite as interested in that area as they used to be. Would you agree with that assessment? What should they be doing?
Absolutely. I mean, first, economically, the situation is really bad. And I was just reading some reports before our conversation about the prices of goods and basic commodity, basic needs, rice, bread, sugar, these basic things that people use in Rojava. The prices are are doubling in some situations. At a time when there is no real income. As you said, there was a drought. There's been drought for 2 consecutive years, and there aren't many produce or local produce or crops for people to gain any cash from. The oil situation, again, this Star Crescent, I think they are called, the American company, are not able to export or to market any of the oil that is being produced, although it's little. But again, it's not helping the situation, adding insult to injury. I think the border closure will worsen the situation a lot more. Looking at the role of the Americans, I think they are the officious bystanders in all of this. I don't know why. I mean, talking to the various sides of the Kurdish dialogue that was sponsored by General Muslim and the Americans, they say for the past on 8 or 9 months, no American has talked to them about this dialogue. And this was one of the key instruments in in normalizing relations between the KDP and the area in the and Rojava, but it seems to have put to a complete halt. And so far, we have not seen, since the new administration, we have not seen any serious American engagement in that area. Some say that this is paving the way for another sellout, maybe a pull out of that area completely and handing it over to Erdogan. This is what some people say. And others are saying that Rojava is really at the bottom of Biden's agenda. And their engagement with Rojava was, as they used to describe, a transactional relationship in terms of just fighting ISIS, basically treating the Kurds as a cheap security company for them and totally forgetting the humanitarian toll that will be involved should they withdraw and allow the likes of Erdogan or the Syrian regime to enter the area and retake it.
So, as ever, one can only hope that the Kurds at least become unified, faced with all these odds, instead of, allowing these big powers to exploit their differences and set them against each other. Hiwa, it was a great conversation. Thank you so very much for taking the time. Our best to Talar, who is every bit as interesting as you are. Talar he was very super duper wife. And hope to have you both on our show again soon. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Amberine. It was a pleasure talking to you.
I'm Elizabeth Hagedorn, and I'm the State Department correspondent at Al Monitor.
And I'm Joe Snell. I'm Al Monitor's video editor. Let's admit it, this past year has been difficult to stay on top of the news and sift through what's accurate and what's misleading. Let Al Monitor help you.
If you care about the Middle East and North Africa, you should consider listening to Al Monitor's audio series On the Middle East with Andrew Parasalidi and Amber Zaman, and On Israel with Ben Caspi. You can now watch our newest video podcast, Reading the Middle East with Gilles Capel. You can subscribe to these series on your favorite podcast platforms.
And through a host of free daily and weekly newsletters, we offer a range of perspectives with the highest journalistic standards. You can subscribe to these newsletters at almonitor.com.
As an award-winning media service headquartered in Washington, D.C., Al Monitor has a network of over 160 contributors around the world.
So if you haven't done so already, be sure to visit almonitor.com, where you can find all of these newsletters and podcasts along with first-class reporting and analysis.
So that brings us to the end of another episode of On the Middle East. Please tune in next week for another episode with another very exciting and interesting guest.